While we were out in the Bahamas for those several months, we ate through several Anchor Snubbers. So that's on my project today. I'm going to make up a few new Anchor Snubbers. I was surprised we ate through them so quickly. Here, I'll show you what happened. This is the single leg one that we had attached to the towing eye down at the water line. So this loop was on the towing line, and then we would do a rolling hitch or something on the anchor chain to connect it on this end, and this end, when it wasn't used, was stored on deck. But look at what happened here. At some point, when the chain is slack and drapes down, this was getting, rubbing along the chain and just chafed through. This is the second one we went through. We went through two of these. The first one went in the trash months ago. So that's what happened to that one. And then after, this happened, we sort of abandoned that single leg snubber and went to a double leg snubber that comes on deck. This one ended up chafing too. Check this out. So this is, if you can imagine this coming off as a V, this loop, and this loop attaches to the anchor chain. We put that on there with a soft shackle. And then each leg of this comes up to one side of the boat, right? And then these loops go up through the hawse pipes and attached to the deck cleats. Well, check this out. This one is rubbing right where it goes through the hawse pipe. Didn't attack the line itself yet, but definitely has rubbed through the chafe guard. So that needs attention. We were still using this one, it was fine. But like I said, it's definitely on my list to make new Anchor Snubbers. I was really close to ordering new nylon double braid or 3-strand to make Anchor Snubbers out of, because I thought we wanted the shock resistance of that kind of line. That's a deeper subject, but briefly, in some lines you do want some shock resistance. Dock lines, for example, you don't want dock lines to give to stop the boat suddenly. You want some shock absorbing in the dock lines, and 3-strand or some double braid, depending on what you buy, has some elasticity to it, which is really important for dock lines. And I assumed we would want that for Anchor Snubbers as well. And wouldn't you know it, just about the time I started thinking about this project, there turned out to be a long conversation on the Nordhavn owners group about Anchor Snubbers. And by the way, the Nordhavn owners group is a fantastic resource. It's I can't say enough about it. Technical discussions, anything you need to know about these boats or stuff, there's somebody on there that knows the answers. And there's always a difference of opinion too, so it gets really interesting. But anyway, that's an aside. There was a long discussion on the Nordhavn owners group about Anchor Snubbers, and very strong feelings about having the single leg snubber that goes to the towing eye at the water line, and also strong feelings about having the two-legged one that comes on deck. We were having better luck with the two-legged ones coming to deck. I felt like the boat swung a little bit less in, heavy windy conditions. But there's no doubt about it that the single leg one is much easier to deploy and retrieve. So I've decided to make both. We will attach the single leg one, we'll keep it there. We'll have the double leg one that we can deploy when we feel like it might be better. We'll have both backup too, right? But anyway, back to that Nog discussion. It also talked about material to make the Anchor Snubbers out of, what line would be best. And like I said, I was just on the cusp of ordering a bunch of 3-strand to make these out of, but people on the Nog that are smart, there's, you figure out pretty quickly who has the good opinions and who has the other opinions. Anyway, we're really advocating to use Dyneema line for Anchor Snubbers. Now that caught me by surprise, because Dyneema has no elasticity to it. It's extremely strong. However, it has no elasticity to it. Essentially, none. So that really surprised me. But the argument goes like this. If there's no stretch to that line where it's rubbing over something like this one was rubbing over the hawse hole, right? So there was this constant motion like this. And that stretch that was allowing that is what, sort of caused this chafe, or exacerbated it at least. So if we can eliminate that stretch and that motion going through any rub point, the hawse hole in this case, It's going to reduce chafe. I thought that was really interesting. And also, on really windy nights, where these do go through the hawse holes, they groan. And the windier it is, the louder it gets. And sometimes, it's enough to wake you up. The groaning when these lines stretch, rub against that hawse hole. It's not a pop per se, but it's a groan. And anyway, if we could eliminate that would be a huge plus too, right? Now, I was really skeptical about Dyneema because it doesn't stretch, and I thought we would want some elasticity in that anchor system, right? But check this out, and this was explained on the NOG, the Nordhavn Owners Group, and it makes perfect sense, is that anytime we're anchoring, we have all this chain out, right? And I described that in the that long anchoring video I did. I think it was called How Do You Sleep at Night or something like that. You put a lot more chain out than the water depth. So let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that we have, we're in, 20 feet of water. We're going to put out a minimum of 100 feet of chain. So we have all that weight on the bottom. That weight of the chain actually is probably more than the weight of the anchor itself. And it creates this catenary curve. Even if the wind is blowing and that chain is stretched out, it's going to still have a catenary to it. And that catenary is the elasticity in the system. Bringing that curve, which might be draping a little bit more. The boat pulls, the curve, flattens out and gets a little straighter. I almost said never. It's never going to go tight. Well, I guess theoretically it could if you're in a really, really bad blow, right? But most of the time it's going to have some catenary to it. And that catenary is the elasticity in the system we need. Okay, that answered my concern about the elasticity in the system. So anyway, long story short, I decided to make these out of Dyneema instead of 3-strand. Now, Dyneema is very slippery stuff. You cannot tie knots in it, and it is easy to splice, but it has to be spliced correctly to be strong. And I'm going to show you in a minute how slippery it is compared to like 3-strand or something. You cannot tie knots in it. 3-strand is, relatively easy to splice too. What you do is you unravel the end of this. This obviously is way too small for the application we would have, but the point is the same. You unravel this so you have 3 individual strands to some predetermined length. You measure what size loop you want, and then on the other end of this, you sort of open these up and then braid these through one at a time. You end up with a loop, and then the end is braided through. And it's relatively easy to do. Mine always end up look like a bad hair braid job, but whatever, it works. So that's how you would do 3-strand. So this is my order of Dyneema that I ordered. Arrived a day or two ago, so let's see how it looks. There it is. I bought a bunch of chafe guard on it. This stuff has really good chafe resistance, but I bought chafe guard as well to put on it. And there's 200 feet of 3/4 inch Dyneema. This stuff is expensive. It was like, $5 a foot or something like that. So it gets back into budgeting, right? Who would think that we'd be spending $1,000 in, well, this stuff wasn't free either, so more than $1,000 on making up Anchor Snubbers. But here we are. Remember what I was saying about not being able to budget too close? Yeah. So 200 feet. I ordered some extra so we would have, to redo this if we needed to. I think, I'm going to have to refer to my notes when we get to actually splicing it. But each one of these is going to use about 30 to 35 feet of line. So there's some extra here, but not a lot. 35 feet times 3 is what, 100 and some odd feet. And then we have to make a loop at the bottom to join it all together. So we're going to use the majority of this for sure, but there will be some left over. So see, that's just a normal bowline, and see how slippery it is. If that works back and forth, it'll just work itself out so easily. By the way, for me, a bowline, the rabbit always go up to the hole and down the hole. Yes, I've been bombarded by all that shit on Instagram. Better way to tie a bowline? I don't care. This works every single time. The foredeck is really nice, especially with the dinghy gone. We've got that huge open space. The problem is it's in full sun today. So I decided to move back here to the aft upper deck. I got a little bit of shade to do my work. So I'm gonna do it here, and we have this nice table to work on. Before I started, I made a bunch of notes about how many lengths I need to measure this out. The measurements of preparing this need to be pretty precise. You need to plan that ahead of time before you even start, cutting stuff, long before you start cutting. I am going to put a link in the description of this video of the instructions that I'm following to do this splice. I found it very simple and very good. Basically, we're going to do a Brummel lock splice to make a loop in either end. On the deck end, it's going to be a longer loop to fit over the big deck cleats that we have. And then on the end that's down in the water, I'm going to do a much smaller loop that is going to get attached to the anchor chain. We're going to do the double leg snubber first. That is the V leg one. So 2 legs coming down to a point. That point's going to attach to the anchor chain. The top of each leg is going to have a larger loop in it to go over the deck cleat. I had to order this fit. I didn't have a fit big enough for this large a line. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to make this loop. It's going to weave back and forth at a point right here to lock it, and then a length here. This is not the actual length. I'm just showing you for demonstration. A length here is going to be buried inside this. This opens up. It's hollow inside. Ends up being like a Chinese finger trap or something, right? In fact, I can get my finger down there. And then when you pull on it, it gets tighter and locks. Even with that, just burying this in here is not sufficient because as the load comes on and off of it, it gets loose and it'll work itself out. There are some horror stories when this line first started getting used in offshore sailing races. There's some horror stories about failures and resulting deaths. Anyway, since then, the splice on this has been perfected. And so like I said, we're going to make a lock stitch there of some kind and then bury the rest of this inside here. So working backwards, the first thing I need to do is measure this, how long is going to be buried, right? And in that link that I had put down there, they're suggesting 50 times the diameter of rope. So in our case, 50 times 3/4 is 38 inches. So if we measure 38 inches out, that's there. So I'll mark that. From that point, I want an 18-inch loop. So that's 36 inches. And that's going to bring us to right there. So what this is going to end up looking like is something like that, with all of that buried. So you can see how we eat up so much line here, right? I'm just trying to make a couple of 20-foot anchor snubbers. We've used something like 6 feet already. All right, so before I start cutting, I'm gonna go flip this around one of our deck cleats just to make sure that this fits right and fits over our deck cleats before I start cutting this expensive line. Here we are on the foredeck, and like I said, I just wanted to size this loop and make sure it fits over one of our cleats. So I've got the marks lined up there. That's what our loop is gonna end up looking like, and that works fine. I like to put a twist in those when we go over, so even still, we've got enough room in that loop to get that on and off there. Okay, so that's our 2 marks brought together. That's our large loop that'll go over the deck cleat. And then I want this to be 19 feet to the beginning of the next loop. So I'm gonna measure that off. All right, so I'm gonna put a tentative mark there and remeasure it. This stuff is so expensive, I don't wanna mess it up. Okay, so that's the beginning of my next loop. I'm gonna make a smaller loop up here because again, this is the end that's going to attach to the anchor chain, so we don't need to fit it through. We don't need to fit it over those deck cleats. We're just going to put a soft shackle or something through here at the anchor chain end. Oh, actually, I'm going to make an infinity loop to join the two ends on it, but that's later. Anyway, so that's the beginning of our next loop, and I want 24 inches for that. That'll be a 12-inch loop. Okay, so that's 24 inches. That'll be a loop like that. Fine. Probably bigger than needs to be, but good. And then we need that berry length at the end here, which, just like the other end, that hasn't changed. It's 38 inches. I'm going to double check all these measurements before I start cutting, because we do have to cut this before we even make the first long loop in this. The way this Brummel lock spliced works is you have to get the long end through a break in the rope as well early on. Yes, I know there's a way to do it without doing that, and somebody online is going to school me about that, but I'm not doing it that way. I found it to be a little bit confusing and overwhelming, so I don't want to tackle that. So I need both ends of the line free. So again, before I start cutting this, I'm just going to double check the measurements. All right, so all my measurements are correct, and I'm going to go ahead and start cutting this. But all right, now that that first one is cut, I need to make the second leg for this V-shaped snubber that we're doing. And rather than remeasuring it, I'm just going to mark my measurements from one to the next. That way I know they're identical, right? So before I even get into the splicing part of this, I need to remember to put the chafe guard on. I said earlier that I bought some of this chafe guard, and even though this Dyneema is super chafe resistant, I decided to buy this, put it on where we've had chafe problems before, and also where it's going to go over the deck cleats on these long loops. So I need to cut this chafe guard to length and get it fished on here before, you know, I start doing the splicing, right? I had already decided how long to make each section of this, and I have it marked down on my notes over here, so this is not arbitrary by any means. So this is where that small loop is going to end up, so I'm just going to fish this piece of chafe guard over that. You know what? I'm going to sear the ends on those first. Okay, now that those are all sealed up, I'm going to fish on the correct one. So we're doing our small loop first. So I'm going to get that one on here. So that's this section here. So that's going to live like that. And at the end of the day here, once we're all done, I'll come up and I'll whip this so it stays in place. But there's our two marks coming together for making that first loop. Again, like I said at the top, this stuff has to be spliced correctly. If you don't, it may fail. So I am following the instructions online from Premium Ropes. They've got a really good video on doing this. I'm going to put the link in the description. But basically, we're going to fish the short end through this mark. Online, they call this Mark A, Mark B. So we're going to fish this end through Mark B all the way until Mark A comes out. And then we're going to take the long end and fish it through the short end at Mark A. So again, this is why we had to cut the length before we started making even the first loop. There's a way to do it without cutting it. If you want to do this onto a piece of hardware or something, yes, I know, I'm not doing it that way. Okay, so through Mark B, we're going to make this hole, getting it right in the middle. So we have 6 strands on each side. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's right. And the idea is that this whole thing has to go through there, right? And we're going to pull that through until Mark A appears. Okay, so now we're going to open up mark A, again, making sure that we get 6 on each side. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep, that's the middle. And we're going to fish the long end back through there. All right, so there we have our loop. That's locked. And now we're going to bury this tail in the long section here. So this is going to go back in and get buried. Remember how I said this stuff is like a Chinese finger trap? It's hollow in the middle, and that's why we're able to just run the fid down the middle of this like that. It just opens up, right? Pull this out here. This does not need to be at an exact spot. So now we need to taper this length in here so it doesn't just stop abruptly. You'll end up with a ledge in your finished product, and also that could end up being a weak spot. So you want to taper it down. And I've seen all sorts of things online about counting strands, you know, and cutting one here, cutting one there, whatever. The Premium Ropes online video that I was following undoes it and then cuts them at an angle. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to get too artful about this part of the project. Okay, so now I have those cut at some, you know, tapered length. Not very artful, but it's fine. Now we can just pull this and it all will disappear in there, right? So with more tension, this will get tighter and tighter. So there we have our first loop. There we go. One loop done. We'll deal with the chafe guard in a minute. Got it, finally. Now, let's see if we can get this chafe guard over the initial splice we did. This, I did not plan very well. I'm not going to be able to get this chafe guard all the way up over this splice. I just did not account for the larger diameter here. So I am going to, I guess, leave this unprotected that length, start the chafe guard there. I'll probably cut a few feet off of this, or maybe I'll just leave it. I don't know. But like I said, this is my mistake. If you're doing this at home, account for that larger diameter when you're ordering this chafe guard. This stuff is supposed to be very chafe resistant anyway, so it'll probably be all right, but I would feel better if it were on there, and obviously that was the plan, right? All right, so now we're ready to make that larger loop. I've got the chafe guard fished on here, and we're, again, just gonna run mark A through at mark B. Okay, if you remember from the first time around, now we need to run the long end through mark A here. So I need to open that up, and this is going to be challenging because we need to get the whole loop through here. So I'm really going to need to open up the strands here. This whole loop needs to fish through there to make that lock. And again, I know there's a way to do it without doing this. I'm not doing that. Okay, that wasn't too terrible. Now we've got that lock in place, and the last step is just to bury this tail in the longer strand, just like we did before. So I've got that chafe guard on there. I've got this other shorter section of chafe guard on the other end. So we're ready to bury that tail. So again, just like before, we're going straight down the middle of all those strands. And you want to go farther than you think you're going to need, so that buries up in there correctly once you trim it. So just like before, I'm going to cut these at different lengths so we'll end up with a tapered tail in there instead of just one abrupt stop. Okay, so now that that's tapered, we'll just pull this through and it'll bury. Okay, there we go. So now that's our larger loop to go over the deck cleat. Got the chafe guard on there. This section of chafe guard, I'll work on getting as far up on that as possible. Again, I really wish I had counted for that larger diameter in there. That was a mistake on my part. Learned from my mistake. Anyway, that's locked, buried. The splice is complete. Now I just need to finish the chafe guards, get those whipped into place. And that's one leg of our 2-leg V snubbers. So these are a lot of work. Okay, now on to the second one. I hope this one goes faster. That first one took a lot of time. But I've got this one all marked off already. I know what I'm doing, so hopefully this one is faster. All right, so now that that's tapered, we'll pull this down and bury that end. Just gets sucked right up in there. There we go. So this second one went a lot faster. After, figuring out what I was doing, marking it off, messing about with the chafe guards. That was an unwelcome distraction. And then doing it was just a lot faster the second time. So any luck at all, these will be the same length, right? Let's see. All right, so I got the long loop on each. That looks pretty good. The chafe guard's evened out there. Once I put them together, that'll be good. They're within an inch. I think that's pretty good. And maybe, if they stretched out, they would be even closer to that inch. That was just doing it like this here. All right. So this is the end that's going to meet at a loop that we're going to make here that is then going to get attached to the anchor chain. So I'm going to attach these together with a loop that then we'll put on the anchor chain with a soft shackle or something like that. So I need to make this loop. I was planning on putting chafe gear on that loop too, but the whole thing is going to be this diameter more or less. So it's just not going to happen. So now it's time to make this infinity loop, it's called, that's going to be at the end of that 2-legged snubber. And again, we need to bury 50 times the diameter of this line in this loop. So we need to bury 38 inches. I've already got it marked on here, 38 inches of this loop. And I'm just sort of doing this visually before I start really cutting stuff. And we're going to use an enormous amount of line for a relatively small loop here. So just, if that's my mark, that we need to bury this length of it. So at some point, this needs to get inserted here and come all the way around. We need to have enough of that to bury. Jesus. So, And then we need to do the other end too. So we actually need 4 times 50. We need a minimum of 200 times 3/4. So we need 50 times 4 times 0.75 equals, we need 150 inches of this minimum to make this loop. That's a lot of line. So you can see why these components are so expensive when you buy them, because there's a lot of line used. And this stuff was, I don't know, $5 or $6 a foot. It wasn't free. All right, so we need a minimum of 150 inches here. Let's see what that is. Okay, so that's 150 inches. What would that look like? We need to get this. Because this line is so big a diameter, you know, that's about as small of a loop as we could make. We could make it a little bit smaller, but you're gonna be getting to the point where you're overlapping your loop. So again, this tail is gonna enter there and bury all the way down to there. I'm gonna cut this, let's see, there's the mark. That one is going to enter up here and bury all the way down to here. So really there's not maybe 4 or 6 inches here at the end that is excess in this. That's the smallest diameter loop that you can make with that 50x bury formula. That's bigger than I anticipated. I thought we'd end up with like a 12-inch diameter loop here, but it is what it is. And again, I'm not going to be able to get this chafe guard on here because I bought the wrong size chafe guard to go over the splices, which I wish I had that. Regardless, here we go. All right, so we have to bury at least that much. I'm going to mark the middle of the loop. Yeah. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to insert this end at the middle and pull it through until we get buried at least to that point. At least to that point. All right, so this will be the 4th time now on this loop. I'm getting really frustrated by this. This is by far the hardest part of it. I thought I had it done. I wasn't happy with it, so I undid it. Okay, so I have both ends buried there, starting there, and now what happened last time is this sort of came unraveled and I had 2 strands exposed there, which I didn't like. So now, let's see if we can get these fully buried without messing up this joint right here. So again, this is starting to come apart right here. This is super frustrating. So because these aren't buried all the way, see what I mean? Because these aren't buried all the way, I can pull it still in tighter. But what is going to keep that from... I guess I need to, fuck, got some thread through there or something. I don't know, maybe I'll tape that for now, but I don't like that. Okay, there we have it. Finally, took me 4 tries to get this loop. Probably not perfect. Again, I'm going to link in the description the video from, I think it was Premium Ropes, that I followed to do this. All I have to say is that the professionals make it look easy. If you have the burning desire to do this yourself, fine. Do it. Order the stuff. But this was a lot of work, and the material was not free. By the time you buy the material, by the time you buy the chafe guards, by the time you buy the FID and mess around with it for a long time, this might be something you just buy. And I'm not even done. I still have to do that single length snubber to attach down at the towing eye at the waterline. That one should be quite a bit easier though. No loop involved. Okay, so now I'm going to start on that single snubber, the one that's going to attach down at the waterline at the towing eye. And the dimensions are almost identical to the ones I did previously. The only difference is the middle section is a little bit longer, just so it can come all the way up to the deck and get cleated off when it's not in use. So to start with, we're going to measure off a 38-inch end to bury, and then 24 inches. That's 2 lengths of a 12-inch loop. Then 22 feet, 24 inches again, and 38 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we've got mark A and mark B. So just like last time, the short end is going to start by going through that direction, and the long end's going to come through the short tail. Then we're going to bury the tail. Okay, see you soon. Okay, there we go. So we got the loop. And we've got the tail here now, which is going to be buried for that whole life right here. Okay, there's one loop and the buried end. Really, doing these eyes is not that bad. The problem is those infinity loops. That was awful. Okay, and there's the end of that one. That's the single leg snubber. The last thing to do is to put all the chafe gear in place and then whip it so it stays in place. That's a project for a different day, or maybe I'll do it on the couch one night or something. I am exhausted. This was an all-day project, and I don't know, milking these buried ends through is no trivial task. My forearms are killing me. This was a lot of work. This was maybe one of the hardest things I've done on the whole boat out of all the projects that I've shown, other than cleaning the bottom. That's horrendous. But this was a lot harder than I expected. And like I said a minute ago, unless you have a burning desire to do it, I'd probably buy these.
And we'll see you on the next one.